CityCast from Explocity.
What makes Cubbon Park so important, so meaningful, and so beloved? More importantly, what makes it so central? For that word comes up a bizarre number of times when the park is being referenced. To the city. Well, there is its physical location for one. Historically, the park lay at the intersection of two entirely different ways of life. The Bangalore cantonment, administered by the British, and the Bangalore Peta, or city, administered by the Maharaja of Mysore, making it a no man's land between oppressor and oppressed, soldiers and civilians, foreigners and natives, tea drinkers and coffee drinkers, largely church and mosque goers and largely temple goers, Tamil and Urdu speakers and Kannada speakers. The elite on both sides, then as now, spoke English. After independence, when city and cantonment were merged to create the new capital city of Mysore state, the park became a staging area for very rapprochement, a safe space betwixt MG Road and KG Road. By and by, it also became the state's administrative center, the nucleus around which the four pillars of democracy swirled. The judiciary, in the form of the Karnataka High Court, settled into the Athara Kacheri, the state's original administrative offices, its grounds stretching almost a kilometer along the park's western periphery. Both houses of legislature and the entire state cabinet moved into the Vidhan Saudha across the road. The executive occupied the rather unimaginatively named multi-storied building beside the Saudha. As for the fourth estate, it not only scattered itself in various locations around the park's boundaries, but also, crossing the imaginary lines between competing publications, met each evening to trade yarns and hot tips at the press club inside the park. And yet, amid all the chaos that surrounded it, the park offered oases of silence and birdsong and dappled shade to those who needed it. Never entirely fenced about in its 152-year-old history, the park became Bangalore's meeting place, sanctuary, and thoroughfare. A place the city went to and went through. It was thus, over the years, organically and effortlessly, that Cubbon Park became central to the Bangalorean heart. A welcoming buffer zone under an open, liberal sky, a capacious green sink with an ability to subsume not only carbon dioxide, but also a diversity of ideas and opinions, the park has always been a space that carries in itself the very DNA of the city that Kempegowda built. And that's why this Bangalore institution, built of equal parts nostalgia, habit, and pure love, is the hero of this book. Which came first? Which influences which? Was it the intrinsically liberal nature of the native Kannadigas that imbued the park with its large-heartedness? Or is it that belligerents of every stripe lost their ire within the confines of this green cathedral? That is a question for the ages, but one thing is true. The very air of Cubbon Park, its soil, its trees, its dwindling waters, is charged with the energy of its people. The ones that birthed it into being, the ones that watch over it from their pedestals of stone, the ones that enhanced it in small and big ways, the ones that fight for it, the ones that care for it, and the ones that visit it and revel in it and love it. This book is as much about its people as it is about the park. As long as Bangaloreans, old and new, carry in their hearts the spirit of these verdant, welcoming acres and are willing to stand up to anyone or anything that threatens it, this city will have nothing to fear.
Different cities have different things that they buy into. In Paris, there's style. You never want to look sloppy in Paris. In New York, it's the energy of movement. Try walking slowly on the sidewalk, and you'll risk having Fran Leibowitz come up and tell you, hey, pretend it's a city. In Bangalore, there is a buy-in to preserve trees. You can ride a motorcycle on a crowded sidewalk, drive up the wrong way on a one-way street, and only mildly annoy others. But try trimming the branch of a tree in public, and the passing Bangalorean will give you a sharp look and probably make a quick call to report you to the authorities. Indeed, most homes have trees, and apartment buildings are sometimes built around an existing tree. Bangaloreans would not be surprised to see a new apartment building with a tree growing right through its floors. This isn't new, though. Something about trees has found its way into the DNA of the city, and indeed in us all. After all, in our DNA, we are part human, part city. And the sense of greenery has expressed itself in the city having two major botanically rich parks, Cubbon Park and Lal Bagh, each as large and as old as some of the greatest city parks in the world. Hyde Park in London, Gorky Park in Moscow, Central Park, New York, and others. My guest Roopa Pai is the author of the book Cubbon Park, The Green Heart of Bangalore. When Roopa was researching her book, she called and asked to interview me, and I said yes, of course, immediately. More than anything, it appealed to my sense of duty. I had been personally involved in an investigative story in my magazine, the Bangalore Monthly, about Cubbon Park, titled The Conspiracy to Kill Cubbon Park. The story was based on some builders and politicians who were allegedly spoiling to parcel off this historic lung space to developers. I grew up in Bangalore. The park has been a part of my life. Roopa made me realize that I share a connection with people I probably will never meet. All of us have been alone with our deepest introspection when we experience the solitude of Cubbon Park, a bliss of birds and dogs, and oddly the company of 100 other humans who exist and at the same time don't. Roopa Pai is a widely published author, having written several children's books ranging from Indian mythology to economics. She is an engineer of computer science, a restaurant reviewer, and a sometimes travel writer. Her ability to deal with such diverse subjects comes from Roopa being a fascinating subject for an urban petri dish, and beneath a charming and unassuming front, an incisive and perceptive mind. So let's find out all about her and about Cubbon Park. Roopa Pai, welcome to the Literary City.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's such a privilege to be here, Ramji.
My privilege. A reading of your various book titles alone indicates that you have the ability to write about a range of diverse subjects. So this goes to a certain innate understanding of learning, epistemology, I believe it's called. I've had scholars of the old texts tell me, and I paraphrase, that the Holy Grail for ancient Indians was ultimate knowledge, and that is the ability to know everything. Do you know anything about this?
I think what they meant by knowledge, it was not obviously book knowledge, but the knowledge of the truth.
And what is that?
And the truth is that we are all the same beneath whatever exterior differences we have, external differences we have. And if we are able to do darshana is the main thing, is what we are pursuing. The ability to see beyond the external differences to the sameness in not only in every other human, but also in every other creature and tree and mountain and river. So I think that the unity of everything, that is what was the truth. And we are unable to see it because we are so caught up in the external differences.
So this quest for ultimate knowledge through meditative introspection, such as standing on one leg in the forest for 14 years, what were they reaching out for?
So I think like every other ancient thinker, we associate our rishis somehow with religion. But actually they were just really deep thinkers, philosophers. And actually I would call them even scientists, because it was all based on empirical information. And once they had realized that the material stuff around them did not satisfy them, did not truly bring happiness, they went looking for the answers to the existential questions, like every human being in history. And those questions never change. And that's what makes these old texts so relevant even today, because the questions they were dealing with were questions like, who am I? Where did I come from? Where did the universe come from? What is the purpose of my life? And of course, what happens after death? That question obsessed them. And to find the answers to that, they said, there's no point looking outside, because this is all just illusion, delusion. We get attached to it so much that we miss the truth, which is actually inside of us. And so they took off. Some sages are often thought of as being sort of selfish for having walked away from their families or whatever. But in fact, they were making this huge ultimate sacrifice to walk away from every comfort they had ever known, from whatever status in society they had, to begin again from scratch and to try and find out the answers to these existential questions and then come back with the answers and share them with everybody else.
You write for children. So is this something you can explain to an 8-year-old?
Actually, yes. Because, I think I think children are often underrated, underestimated. And I think for that reason, something I have realized as a children's author in India, when I look back about our tradition of storytelling for children, what I have discovered is that there were no separate stories written for children. Very, very seldom. I mean, the same stories were told to children as they were told to adults. Maybe they brought in animals like Vishnu Sharma brought in the Panchatantra to make it easier for children to understand. But the same truths were conveyed in a variety of different ways. And the stories were the same. I mean, nobody shied away from telling the story of the Mahabharata to children. If children were part of the audience, it's okay. It was just the philosophy was perhaps explained at a different level to children and to adults. And I think that's possibly the reason why we don't have so much content for children, even visually in India. Even today, we don't have so many children's films. We don't have so much children's programming on OTT platforms or television. It's very much like they can understand. And perhaps this comes from our understanding that children are only children in form, and they're actually old souls that are able to understand. And in fact, they retain their ability to be curious and to be open. They already don't have filters in their mind that will, resist what you're telling them. So they are the kind of best kind of people to be able to give this wisdom to, because they accept it without too much resistance and they are enriched by it, I think. So while I have to use a conversational tone and make sure there aren't too many big words, but apart from that, I think the core, the essence of what the great philosophies of India are talking about, I think a child can get it.
That's very respectful of children. So when did you realize that you could write for children?
That's a very good question, actually. But I think I was one of the lucky ones that always knew I wanted to write. And I grew up, of course, like everybody else of my generation who was educated in English and was a reader. I grew up reading a lot of British books, Enid Blyton specifically. Mm-hmm. And while she was a fantastic storyteller and her language was wonderful and she was never preachy, the problem with consuming so much Enid Blyton was that I grew up feeling that only British children had cool childhoods. And mine, because it didn't resemble those at all, somehow sucked. So I began to, because they were always away by themselves in the sunshine, cycling somewhere, boating somewhere, having club meetings, and then, of course, completely destroying criminals and bringing them to justice. And the only time adults appeared was when the mom appeared with squash and cookies, biscuits for the meeting, and left it outside. She wasn't even allowed into the meeting room.
She didn't have the secret signal.
She didn't know the password.
Of course.
Yeah. And the other time that adults appeared was when the policeman turned up to round up the criminals that these guys had caught. And my life in India was the exact opposite. There were always too many adults around. Too many adults around. Many of them I couldn't even identify, but they were all part of my family. And Enid Blyton wrote so evocatively about food and picnics. And my picnics were always being, stuffed into an ambassador car and going to Lal Bagh and Cubbon Park. I didn't even realize it was a problem until I was maybe 13 and I came across this fabulous Indian children's magazine that was there then called Target.
Yeah, Target.
Yeah, Target. And it changed my life. It flipped the switch because for once I was reading about children like myself. And the way the writers wrote it, it seemed like they were having a marvelous time as well, that their life was wonderful. So I needed someone to tell me that my life was wonderful, to hold up a mirror. And then I said to myself that not only am I going to write for children, I'm going to write Indian stories for Indian children so that another generation does not grow up feeling like somehow they are not represented, somebody else's life is elsewhere. I didn't want them to feel that at all. I wanted them to appreciate what a wonder it is to be an Indian child.
I hear you. Now, speaking of difficult concepts, you wrote a book for children on economics, and I'd like to quote from that. Economics as a branch of study didn't even exist 250 years ago. Coming to think of it, neither did electricity, sliced bread, plastic, selfies, or the United States of America. I take cause with sliced bread.
Oh, there was.
King Alfred, baking, spiders.
Oh, okay, maybe.
I read that book with some interest, and I think that it just takes the most minor of edits to turn it into a book for adults.
Wow.
For people trying to learn the basics of economics, like an economics for dummies or something.
Yeah, right.
So you're an author of children's books. You majored in computer science, economics. Now, how did you wade into that swamp?
That's again a nice question, because I like answering that question, because the fact that I waded into it was very surprising to me itself. So I have to go back to the Gita for that, the Gita for children. I did not, I did not grow up in a home that even had a copy of the Gita. So that kind of reverence that a lot of Indians have for it, I did not. And then I wrote it, and then I sort of hid under the table, because I was wondering what the reception would be for somebody who's not steeped in it to take on this task, audacious task of not only retelling it, but retelling it to a young and impressionable audience. I thought the blowback would be huge. In fact, what happened was that it was embraced widely, continues to be.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's over 100,000 copies sold now over a year.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it is. And a UK edition coming out at the end at Deepavali, and all kinds of things translated into Dutch, apart from Indian languages. So all kinds of good stuff happened. And because of that reception that the Gita got, I said, maybe this is a good time to tackle something else. It gave me the confidence that I could go to a subject that I knew nothing about, approach it with an open mind and humility, willing it to tell me what it knew so that I could understand it, and maybe it would speak to me. So I said, what is the one subject that I have never studied, I know nothing about, and everybody talks so knowledgeably about it, and it sort of seems interesting, when people talk about it. And I said, economics. And so the first thing I did was ask for a 9th grade economics textbook, ICSE. And I sat with it, and then I read lots of other stuff, and I said, this is very interesting. And that's how the book on economics came about, with absolutely no background.
So books for children on mythology, science, economics, and now a book for everyone about a park, Cubbon Park, the green heart of Bangalore. Now, what is it about a park that's so important?
So many things, but I think essentially it's a place where you can go and escape from the urban sprawl and chaos, and feel, at least for a few moments, that you are within nature, in a jungle, get to connect with yourself in the quiet, and and everything organic and natural around you. I think it's a place, a sanctuary, I would say.
So it is really a very meditative thing to do, to walk through the parks, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's the reason why all the big cities in the world actually create big parks.
Yeah.
Now, I really looked, and I apologize to whoever it is that I need to apologize to if I didn't find it. I didn't find any other book about parks in Bangalore, in India.
Really?
Any history of any parks? Yeah, I don't know. Do you know of any?
I mean, Lal Bagh, there are several books about.
Oh, no. Bangalore, outside of Bangalore.
Oh, outside of, I don't know. I haven't even looked, but nothing comes to mind.
Well, speaking of parks in India, other than Bangalore's 2 parks and Delhi, which has Lodi Gardens and Nehru Park, for example, I don't know of many other parks.
I never even thought about it. Yeah.
Well, good. Okay. So let's talk about the world's great parks. Now, in fact, let's talk about just Hyde Park, because there's Hyde Park in London was actually built by Henry VIII.
Oh.
And he, in 1536, remember, this is the time Kempe Gowda was formed in Bangalore, right? Right. It's about the same time, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, Henry VIII decided to grab a lot of land away from Westminster Abbey And that's significant also because that was the time of the separation of
Yes.
church and state and the whole Henry VIII's angst.
Yeah, Anglican.
And he,
Yeah.
not only did he separate church from state, but also separated land from church.
And he also separated his wife's heads from
Yes,
their
he
bodies.
did.
Yeah.
So Hyde Park is older, but still, Cubbon Park is 152 years old. And still, it's not the oldest park in Bangalore.
Yeah. Lal Bagh is way older because Hyder Ali set it up. So
Mid 18th century, right?
1760, I think.
But in fact, it was much older than that, correct?
Yes, yes, yes.
So at the same time as Henry VIII, Kempegowda grew flowers there.
So they say that he grew roses of red flowers for worship. So many, it has morphed many times. But Cubbon Park has remained true to what it was meant to be when it started. It was meant to be a people's park. It continues to be a people's park.
So Bangalore has two great parks, and you are the first to write a history of Cubbon Park.
I know. I don't know how.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You're the first to do it, and that's all counts. I mean, who has lived in Bangalore and not felt an emotional connect to Cubbon Park?
Oh, absolutely. And this is not only true of old Bangaloreans, Ramji. Every new person who comes into the city eventually ends up in Cubbon Park.
Right. And if they are from many other cities in India, they have never seen a real park.
Right. I didn't think of that, but it's probably true. You're probably right. And what really pained me when I was writing this history was that we completely missed the 150th anniversary of the park.
2 years ago, no celebrations.
COVID happened.
Right.
Maybe there was some celebration planned. I don't know. But very early in the year, we shut down because of COVID. So, and for the first time, Cubbon Park shut down. That was traumatic.
Now, some people may or may not know that Bangalore was actually always two cities until recently. One owned and operated by the British, and the other historically belonging to the Maharaja and the Mysore Kingdom. Now, Cubbon Park straddled the two. Now, there's a perception in Bangalore that all the cantonment residents believe that Cubbon Park belongs to the cantonment, and the city people believe that Lal Bagh is a city park. But in fact, Cubbon Park also was in the Maharaja's land, wasn't it?
Yes, this is another thing I discovered, that Cubbon Park was the Maharaja's at some point. It became, that's why they had to, you remember when we talk about how Gustav Krumbiegel wanted to move the police station away from the Victoria statue.
Yes, the borders of nations had to be redrawn.
Yeah. And Queen Victoria stands in Maharaja's territory, and Gandhiji stands in the cantonment, right opposites. I mean, I think that is a big symbol of Bangalore itself.
Now, that is symbolic of the cooperative sense of how the British and the Maharaja worked on Bangalore as one. Your book captures all of these things extremely well. And you illustrate how the politics of the day had a bearing on anything that was being decided upon in the park. The statues, the architecture, the greenery, so much.
Yeah.
Really is a part of the administration.
Yeah. And continues to be.
Completely.
Yeah.
Even as recently as the late 90s, it took an activist judge, Michael Saldana, to actually issue suo motu orders to stop the complete destruction of the park. It would have happened if he hadn't stepped in and did what he did.
The park was way bigger than, the land defined as the park was way bigger than what we have as the park now. So they were trying to build a legislator's home, I think.
Right. And in a very heartening manner, the moment the city realized that there was this game afoot to try and cause the destruction of the park, activism came up. And that's when people first knew that Cubbon Park even needed to be saved. I mean, the fun part of Cubbon Park was these impromptu music concerts that used to take place on Sundays.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes.
And you had these kids, the cops looking on benignly as kids lit up joints and smoked pot.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
Yeah.
And ever since that time, activism has pretty much characterized Cubbon Park. I think it's a credit to the administration that Cubbon Park has remained a canine-friendly park with a dog park. Right. And, there are people who are running around trying to keep people from littering and leaving food packets lying around. And the underlying ethic is that there's a citizens' activity which is rising up to tackle everything about parks and both sides of the equation being handled all at once.
Yeah.
running around,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yes.
So, at what point in time does activism stop it from being a people's park? Because too much of that can daunt people and just keep them away, right?
Yes, I think the good part is there is different kinds of activism, and the pulls are in all directions. I think that keeps the fulcrum stable, because it's not only pulling in one direction. As soon as somebody starts pulling in one direction, somebody starts in the other direction. So I think this constant push and pull will keep it good for all of us.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's really very well said, if I may. Now, you concluded your reading with this paragraph. This book is as much about its people as it is about the park. As long as Bangaloreans, old and new, carry in their hearts the spirit of these verdant, welcoming acres and are willing to stand up to anyone or anything that threatens it, this city will have nothing to fear. What does that mean? Are people still threatening the park?
Oh, all the time. All the I mean, different agendas basically. Some the walkers perhaps don't want the dogs. The dog people, want the walkers to be friendlier towards the dogs, and somebody wants, no vehicles to be there in the park. The other people want the vehicles to be allowed through the park, particularly the police, because they see it as a very important thoroughfare. If you cut that off, then we'll have even more congestion on the streets. So there are so many competing things. So in that sense, it's always under threat. Then there are people who want to uh, build more things inside the park, add some concrete, make it more walkable. Yeah. So, and there are and people will say, yeah, we need more benches, right? We're older people, we are walking in the park and there's no place to sit down. If we start walking, we can't sit down. And then there are other people who say, we don't want any more concrete in the park, not one bit, because we want the mud paths to be mud paths. But uneven mud paths are difficult for older people to walk on. They would rather have a paved path. So, there's so many competing things. So in that sense, it's always under threat. But I love that in 1998, what the activists did, Michael Saldana, Bimal Desai, Explocity reporting on it, like putting them on the cover, bringing it awareness. And I think TJ's George, he really gave it a lot of importance on the front pages of his newspaper. So it sort of brought it into the public consciousness, and people have now realized, at least that generation of people realize, that this is not something that we can just let go. This is something that needs protection. We all need to keep our little beady eyes on what is happening in the park so that we don't lose it. And the good part, I think, about Cubbon Park, even though I know that there are a lot of people who really want no traffic in the park, I think personally, and I might get a lot of hate for this, but I do think it's important to keep the traffic flowing in the park to some extent, because that is what keeps it alive in people's minds. The moment you put a wall around it, people forget that it exists. I think every time you drive through Cubbon Park, you notice something, flowers are in blooms, and you say, this needs to be there. We can't do without it. It's such a drop in temperature, a drop in pressure, stress as soon as you enter the park. I think it's important for people to experience that on an ongoing basis to build the love. Otherwise, they will forget it exists.
And that characterizes your book. Your book is a labor of love.
It truly is. It is my paean of love. It's a love song to the park.
And on that wonderful note, Roopa Pai, thank you so much for being my guest on The Literary City.
Thank you, Ramji. This was such a pleasure talking to you.
And that was Roopa Pai, author of Cubbon Park, The Green Heart of Bangalore, a history book about a park. There's a link in the podcast description to where you can buy that book and everything else that Roopa Pai has written. And I'll be back with that fun segment, What's That Word?, where we look at words and phrases that we use every day, all the time, but never stop to think about where they came from. That after this. And I'm back with What's That Word? And to help me with it, here she is, my co-host.
Hello, my name is Praniti, but you can call me P. That's P with an A, not another E.
Hello, P with an A. Say, did you have fun yesterday?
Yes, that live literary city event, the one to launch Roopa Pai's book, it was such a blast.
Wasn't it? I was happy so many people showed up for the event to to Blossom Book House, right? It's called Blossom Book House on Church Street. The place was hopping.
That place was packed.
Yeah.
I mean, people were standing in the aisles and at the back, and there was barely any breathing room, leave alone elbow room.
Plenty of breathing and elbow room on the stage for me. But it's heartening for a book event. But let me tell you, I really enjoyed that, doing the Literary City live. So much energy in that format.
Yeah, and you were great. You were so funny, the crowd was eating out of your hand.
Oh, thank you. That's sweet of you to say. Well, enough about me, though. All right, P with an A, what's that word?
Okay, so at the event, you actually quoted from Roopa Pai's book about how, they kept moving Mark Cubbon's statue.
Right.
And the phrase you quoted was this: another exigency forced the peripatetic statue to up sticks again and move a few hundred meters east.
Right, I get it. Up sticks and move. Lovely phrase, right?
Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the equivalent phrase is pack up and leave, right?
That is exactly right.
So where did this come from then? We don't hear it used that often. Maybe at best heard an uncle or two use it while talking about someone moving their home.
Right. Moving their home is what it means precisely. And, that expression you said not used recently, but it was last used, let me see.
In Roopa Pai's book, launched yesterday.
True. Most recently used yesterday. So you're saying she somehow turned this into a Gen Z expression?
Yeah. Okay. So then when was the expression first used?
Well, it seems to me that this is one of those phrases that simply happened into the English language.
How so?
Murky etymology. As recorded expressions go, the American cousin of the phrase up sticks and move is pulling up stakes and moving. Now, in the days of the Western migration, the westward migration in the US, when people moved location frequently, they camped where they could, and then they pulled out the wooden pegs or stakes that they had previously driven into the ground as either territory markers or the pegs of tents, the same thing, and packed that up with the rest of their shit and moved.
How colorful.
And this recorded phrase in the US was in the mid 17th century. So that's about 1650-ish. But at the same time, there are writings that acknowledge that up stakes came from the British up sticks.
Okay, but there's no record in Britain.
Well, I looked as hard as I could, and I honestly couldn't find anything written. But I did find out that it was a fairly common spoken expression by all accounts, but no, none found definitively in recorded use. However, in terms of etymology, there's also the theory that the expression came from sailing, and the sticks refer to the masts of ships. They upped sticks and set sail.
That's interesting. And so many expressions are nautical in their origin, aren't they?
They are indeed.
Yeah, so what of the usage? Is the way Roopa Pai used it typical?
Pretty much. That's exactly how it's been used all the time. So let me give you some examples of usage. Here's one from Indian history. This is from Sir George Fletcher Macmahon from his 1934 Potboiler, The Living India, Its Romance and Realities. And the phrase reads, the Rajput city of Delhi was captured, and then the disgusted Rajputs up sticks and fled before Islam and the Turk, and finally settled amid the inaccessible mountains and jungles and the occasional fertile valleys of what is known as Rajputana or Rajasthan.
That sounds more like romance than reality.
Yeah, honestly, it sounds more like fiction than romance.
Okay, now do you have an example for the nautical reference?
Do I now? And let me warn you that the attribution is much longer than the quote itself.
Okay.
Right. This is from James Lansdale Hodgson, and the book title is The Sea and the Land, Being Some Account of Journeys, Meetings, and what was said to me in Britain, France, Italy, Germany, and Holland between March 1943 and May 1945.
What? That's the title?
It is. And the quote,
Okay.
if a doctor had to do an operation in a sailing ship, you upped sticks and went before the wind, he said.
That's funny. These older books had long titles, didn't they?
They did, but consider the subtext, the giveaway in this title. If a doctor needed to operate on someone on a ship, they needed to up sticks and set sail before the wind could make the ship pitch and yaw. A rather delicate situation, yes. A rocking ship, not great, whilst slicing up some random dude. Oops. Can't have made the guy's family very happy with the state of medical services. But anyway, long titles, you say? The old books? Well, some new ones do too.
Like what?
Like, haven't you read Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone and the young boy who lived under the staircase of the uncle who was a muggle but did not know it? And the butler did it.
Say, now, you know cricket, right?
Somewhat.
Yeah, so at the end of a day's play, don't they up sticks and leave there too?
Nice. But no, they don't up sticks. They draw stumps.
Ugh, up sticks, draw stumps, same difference.
Sure. Say that at the game, and you would be the one upping sticks and leaving the Chinnaswamy Stadium. Just like they did to Sir Mark Cubbon's statue right near the same stadium.
I'm going to save face, and how about I up sticks and leave right now?
But do come back in a week.
Fine, I will. Bye.
And that is our show. Thank you so much for being here and for listening. I would like to thank my guest, Roopa Pai, and my co-host, Pranati P with an A, Madhav. Now, before you go, hit that subscribe button. Why miss an episode? See you again next Wednesday.